All right, I think we are live. Hello! For those of you who are joining us tonight, we are going to be discussing Eclipse and Breaking Dawn by Stephenie Meyer. So I am joined by four wonderful people, and Michelle from Thor Wants Another Letter is going to be stepping in for Autumn. So thank you for doing that and offering an Indigenous perspective on these books, which we definitely need. So most of you probably know me, Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany, because you're on my channel, but I'm going to have everybody go around and briefly kind of introduce themselves in case you missed the last live show. So Isabella, if you want to start.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Isabella. I'm also known as the Feminist Bookworm over on Instagram, but I'm also an indie bookseller. And so I read a lot of YA is what I deal with, as well as planning events and selling books. But yeah, that's basically me.
Hello, I'm Izzy as well, but I'm going by Izzy during this to avoid our confusion. I mostly talk about romance on my channel, and yeah, this was delightful. And yeah, I'm feeling that mood. I don't know, guys. I brought wine this time. I will say that. I remembered wine.
Oh, yeah, I just want to quickly say if I burst out laughing, it's not at any of you, it's at the chat.
Yeah, my cat's currently at my feet doing something weird, which is why I was like, oh crap, it's my turn.
Sorry, we interrupted you with like the one.
No, you're fine. Yep, that's it. That's all I got. This was torture.
Michelle.
Oh yeah.
Hi, Honey Wash Day. My name is Michelle from Thor Wants Another Letter. I'm here for the Indigenous perspective. I am Lakota, so I cannot speak like 1000% on the Quileute representation. However, I feel that Indigenous representation on this live show is a lot more important than like no representation at all.
Ashley.
Hey everybody, I'm Ashley from Bookish Rome. You're right. I have the entire bottle because it's not only are these books calling for an entire bottle, but it's just been an entire bottle type of day. So I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to chit chat.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is going to be interesting. I guess if people kind of want to start by overview, like if something, I don't know, like your experience of reading these, if you're able to read them, what you expected. I'll say for me, the first time I read this, Breaking Dawn was my least favorite book in the series. This time it might have been my favorite. It still wasn't good. But it might have been my favorite. And I think Eclipse was definitely my least favorite. And like if you've seen my vlog where I read them both in a weekend, which was an undertaking.
Yes, you did.
I was so proud of you.
Crazy.
I just wanted to be done so I could read other stuff.
That was me this week. I was like, I had finished one in a day, and then the other one took me about 3 days. And I rewarded myself with good books. It's sweet. Because I literally was like, I can't.
Mine was the exact opposite because me and Autumn are reading a book together and we like hated that book. And so now I was like, finally something to break the just awfulness. So I was just glad for an escape. Really.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anybody else, like general feelings reading these?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the five of us, I'm probably the one with the let's just start bursting out loud. It's because of the comments.
Sorry, that was too funny. Oh, and Autumn's in the chat. Hi, Autumn.
Hey, Autumn.
Hi, Autumn.
Love you.
But I think of the five of us, I probably have the most like positive feelings toward this series. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I think so. I was a Twihard like back in my too young to be reading days. They just hold a special place in my heart, even though reading them now, it's just like, whoa, it's like, what the hell were you reading, Isabella? Like, who let you pick these books up? But I think I was surprised the most, though, at how much I disliked Eclipse on principle this time around, because I always really liked Eclipse. I always liked sort of the expanse of the story in terms of the characters and how we got to learn more about the other Cullens that we didn't really know anything about before. And I did still like that, at least with the Rosalie's, like with Rosalie's story, not Jasper's. Don't get me started on that right now. But I just like, I'd always liked Eclipse, and it seemed to universally be everyone's least favorite book in the series because it was just like boring or something. And I never really understood why. And like, now I'm like, okay, now I understand why.
Who wants
Yeah,
next?
see, I had the exact opposite feeling on like the whole backstory of like figuring out who's who and Rosalie and Jasper. Like I actually really love the way that the backstories are. Like by far, Carlisle is my most favorite like of backstory because
I liked Rosalie's story a lot.
The historical parts of it, but like I do like the Jasper part. Like forgive me, but I do like reading about what happened with him and like how basically that in essence Alice, because of what happened to her, she is like, they're like a battery, one part's the negative, one part's the positive, and they just like meld so well.
See that? I liked getting Alice's backstory. I always like Alice though, because she's
really fun.
weird.
She's really fun.
She is fun. She's just totally different from everyone else in the family, like of the Cullens. So I just always enjoy when she's on page.
Yeah.
Which is probably why I don't like Breaking Dawn, because she's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thanks, Beth. That's so nice. The super chat. I don't think it's the first time I've ever gotten one on a live stream before.
Yeah, but that was definitely my favorite thing about Eclipse. And I think that was my favorite thing about it, even as a 10-year-old, was the expansion of the characters, because you can say that the characters are, some of them are not interesting, but there's such a big cast of characters that it becomes interesting seeing how they relate and how they interact, even if you don't necessarily like the interactions, but it's interesting from a critical perspective.
Yeah.
I feel so old because I was like 18 when I read those books. It was only because my friend was reading it and she just like turned into a zombie when she was reading it. I was like, what is going on with you? What is happening? And that she was going through a vampire phase. And she just hands me Twilight, read this book. I'll buy you a book. Just read it. I was like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was like 20 when I read these, about like 1920. So it's been a long time.
yeah, I mean, it's same. It's been since I was 17.
Yeah, I was 17, 18 when I read them. So we're talking over 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah. It's like 12.
Oh, yeah. Well over 10 for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was 9 when I read it.
I know. You're over here like, I was a baby. And we're like,
Yeah.
why are you reading this?
I know. Meanwhile, Ashley's like, what librarian gave that to you?
It wasn't even, it was my best friend, actually. She's 2 years older than me, though. So, like.
Hey, if kid wants to read, let him read.
I mean, there's really nothing inappropriate in them. Like, there's stuff that, like, you don't want to, like, thinking about it now, like, the fact that was my first exposure to romance, like, that's not good. But there's nothing, like, I guess, like my parents, like, they didn't really care about, like, violence or swearing or whatever, but, like, they had issues with, like, sex stuff in books. And there's at least, like, the first 2, and barely in the 3rd one. There's not much sex stuff. So like whenever I think of things as being inappropriate, I think of them as how much sex stuff do they have, because like that's how I grew up, and so there wasn't much of that. So I'm like, it's not like there wasn't anything in there that I was.
I think it's more like thematically and what it's saying about relationships.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the part
that makes it inappropriate.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.
That for me as a parent, because I'm very much so just naturally being a librarian, like we're very, very much against the whole concept idea of censorship. Like that's just, we don't do that. We don't stand for that. We don't like to withhold people from reading whatever they want to read. But as a parent, even though it's not on, a lot of the stuff that I consider to be inappropriate and problematic is not necessarily always direct and on page direct. It is the subtlety of it and how it can make certain impressions because certain things are romanticized that shouldn't be romanticized. Like,
for sure.
I think I get like the whole backstory and it's interesting learning dynamic, but even I couldn't get down with that. I literally was like, when I was reading Rosalie's part, I was like, okay, so what's the purpose of her part? Like, are we trying to humanize her? Is this an agenda type of thing, or it's like, I wanted to get married first and then have a baby? I wanted that traditional family unit. I was like, so what narrative are you trying to push with her? And then with Jasper, we never addressed that. Jasper was part of the Confederate Army.
Mhm.
That just kind of went,
Yeah.
it just kind of went there. It was like, yeah, he was part of the Confederate Army. And I feel like that was romanticized. And to me, personally, that's problematic because nothing about that should be romanticized whatsoever. So even when she was doing the backstories, and I do like Carlisle's. I think I just have this thing for Carlisle that I think he's just an interesting character and one of the few characters that I actually really, really enjoy. But even with the backstories, I was like, what are you trying to push with giving us these glimpses of other characters within this book? I just feel like Meyer had some agendas.
Yeah,
some of the stuff that she was
because
doing
in
with
Eclipse
Eclipse.
it's kind of like all over the place with what is the underlying issues of every different thing. And like even with the Confederate Army thing, he's in there and then he yeets out of there to be with Maria, and then it's like it's never, they don't go back to it, and he's never like, oh yeah, this should have happened or that should have happened. There's no like middle apology era. It's just like, yeah, I was in the army and I was awesome, and then I went on out and I started killing other vampires. I'm like, what are you doing, bro?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's part of where the like romanticizing comes, is that like it totally glosses over what the war was even about. Instead, you just have him sort of being this hero who's saving women and children from the attacking troops. And yeah, like that just felt like a problem to me. I think the other thing that I noticed reading it this time, which was interesting, is when she's talking about the vampires in the South, she mentions that especially ones in city centers are able to get away with more easily, like basically like killing more people. And like part of me kept thinking, like, is this subtly saying that's because of racism? Because like no one cares if they kill Black people in the South? Like, is that what you're saying there? Like, there's just a lot of like undercurrents of like low-key racist stuff and white supremacist idea, especially the white supremacist ideas that are just woven throughout the book. And like even I noticed when he meets Maria is it Maria? I think for the first time, who's the vampire that turns Carlisle. He sees her with two other women and says, oh, these incredibly beautiful women who have like alabaster or like porcelain skin or something. And he's like, even her who like even though she has Mexican features. So I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yes, I found the quote.
She has white skin despite her Mexican features.
I had to find that quote because when I listened to that on audio, I had to rewind it. I was like, no, I didn't hear that right. But literally it says, even the little black-haired girl whose features were clearly Mexican was porcelain in the moonlight. I was like, who
also
thought that was
okay? Like that just...
Who thought that was okay?
And also turning Benito, like Benito is the villain too, because they created the army of newborn vampires. So even then, like POC is viewed as like the ultimate villain.
I mean, I also
true. I mean, that's the thing is like anytime you have a POC vampire or whatever, they're all pretty much always a villain in some way or negative.
Yeah.
And like, and anytime you have a pretty character who is not white, it comes with some kind of a thing like an exotic sort of beauty, or like who was it? Oh, what was it? Was it in Eclipse when there's like a girl, one of the native girls, I can't remember where this is exactly, but she says at the beginning that like her nose and mouth were too broad for traditional conventional beauty, but then after she watched her for a while, she starts to see what he sees in her, and I'm like, wait a minute, so because she doesn't have white features, she can't be conventionally attractive. Like, it's over and over and over again.
Yeah,
and that's a big thing
I wanna
even
address-
now. Like, just that if you're like white passing, or that you have, if you're not as beautiful if you don't have like European type features, and it's like, no, everybody's beautiful. But yeah, that's a big thing in like Native communities, where the like, oh, you look too white, or you don't look Native enough. That's a huge thing. And like, just the fact that it's touched on, but it's not like it's touched on negatively, really sucked reading that.
Yeah, I also want to like address Rosalie a little bit, especially given what you said about her, Ashley, which I thought was interesting. And I think that also Meyer, she makes Rosalie out to be the most beautiful of all the vampires. And Rosalie is pale skin, obviously blonde, like honey blonde hair, like tall and willowy, looks like a supermodel. And like when she was a human, she had like eyes so blue they were almost lilac or violet or something like that, which again, like, you know, the whole like, you know, blonde hair, blue eyes, you know, I mean, I don't even want to get into that, but I mean, you all nodding, you all know what I when I say that. But I will say that I did find her story interesting, because I think what she was trying to, Rosalie is supposed to be sort of the catalyst to Bella, and the reason she hates her is not just because she's annoying and because she's like putting them all in danger by like being around their family, but because she wishes she were never made into a vampire. Like, if she could give it all up to go back to being human, because like her body can't change, and that's why she can't have children, and that's something that she really wanted, not necessarily because she was supposed to, even though I'm sure she was supposed to, but because that's really what she wanted for herself. And so I think what she was trying to do is saying, here's this girl who's saying like, I want to, like, I'm not dying, like I'm perfectly normal, and I want to become a vampire just because I want to be like that, and I want to be with Edward forever. And Rosalie's like, even if I loved Edward as much as you love him, I still would not make the decision you're wanting to make. And I want to show you why, what I gave up by becoming a vampire and what you were going to be giving up in turn. And I think that in Breaking Dawn, we see that, because Bella does nearly die having her child. She decides to go through with having her child, like with having the baby, knowing that it more than likely, like, it should have killed her. It didn't, but it should have killed her. And so she ended up kind of almost siding with Rosalie in a way by making the decision that Rosalie would have made, knowing that Rosalie would have done the same thing, even if she knew she was going to.
Well, and it's also because Rosalie is like aggressively pro-life.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like the baby stuff in Breaking Dawn is aggressively pro-life, and I am deeply uncomfortable with the narrative that Rosalie would rather Bella die, and take the baby so she can take care of the baby and fulfill her dream of having a child. Versus,
there was literally that quote where during, I think it's in Jacob's perspective, where he's kind of like, he and Edward are kind of like communicating, like Edward's like nodding and like, because he's talking through him, through his mind. And there's this line about how Edward like nods when Jacob's like, wait, Rosalie's after the baby. And it's like, he nods because he can read Rosalie's mind too. And he's like, so clearly the only reason she's like, I guess they're supposed to have been bonded by the experience. And so they would have like always be friends after that. And after Bella survived, but like, she was after the baby. Like,
exactly. And that was like super hard. Yeah. Especially like I almost everyone I know that's had a baby in the last like 3 to 5 years has had traumatic birth experiences. I know Ashley has. I know you've talked about it some.
Yeah, I did too.
So, and my sister-in-law has. I've got, piles of friends. And I mean, the list of people I know that have had traumatic birth things, I was just like, to read this and have gone through that is awful.
It was a choice. It's like a horror novel. I'm like,
it is.
What happened? Like for this one chapter, it's like we're reading a bloody horror novel. Like,
and like, I'm someone who never wants children. Like, I have no desire to go through birth, and I'm like, I don't feel good for any of my friends to go back and revisit this and be like re-traumatized.
Traumatic, and there's even trauma after the birth experience that they did not, or they don't talk about.
The what? Sorry, what, Michelle?
That even after giving birth, there is trauma after. Like, you can get PTSD. Like, I certainly did have PTSD after giving birth. Like, cut diversion and like you know, just general trauma in general, and that it's not talked about, it's not reflected on. And I really feel like even for a young audience, that there's just not enough things that are talked about in that way, and that Meyer didn't talk about that. And Meyer was more like, just have the baby, even though she's gonna die. Like,
but you could tell that she did it very, very it was very clumsy writing, because Bella was very much so in the beginning, I don't care if I don't have kids. I don't care if this is where it stops. I'm fine with that. That's okay. And then literally the next book, this whole perspective has switched, and it doesn't even feel right, because you know that that's not where Bella's head is. All of a sudden it's like, I want this baby. I didn't know that that I wanted to have this baby until I got pregnant. And it was like, as a woman that's been pregnant and has had a child, it just didn't feel realistic to me at all. Just the whole narrative, the conversations around it, Bella's reactions, even after Bella had the child, her first concern was Edward, which threw me off very, very much. To have gone through so much and to have had such a traumatic experience, having Renesmee, which that whole name is, that's a completely different story. But having Renesmee and her coming to after turning into a vampire, and her first thoughts are, I don't want Edward to know how much pain I've gone through, and Edward. And I'm like, hold up, girl, you just had a whole child. Like, I understand loving your significant other, your partner, but honestly, as a mother, my first thought at that point is going to be my child. I don't care who I've had the child with. I don't care who's in the room. I didn't care about my mother. I wanted my baby. So for me, it was like Renesmee almost came an afterthought. So I was like, so Meyer, where are you going with this? You started off with Bella not caring that she was giving up her choice to have a child just so she could be with this man, which I was like, okay. I mean, you're 18 years old. How do you know? You know, like you are not giving yourself any opportunity to think. It's okay if you decide like you don't want to have kids, but your main focus is doing this in relationship to a man, not because you yourself are like.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the comment.
I can't speak to anything having to do with kids. Like, I'm almost 20 years old. Like, I haven't made the decision yet whether I want to have kids. Like, I don't know. And like, there are people like who I know, like who are my age, who are like, I want to have 4 kids. I want to have 3 kids. Like, I'm just like, I don't like, I think I probably want to have kids one day, but like, I'm just like the kind of person who's like, we'll start with 1 and see how that goes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's fine. Like, if you are, you know, if you decide like, you know, I want a big family or I don't want kids, it's fine. But I think that should be a decision that you make in terms of yourself, what you think is beneficial to yourself, whether you think, oh, you know, like, I just don't think I would ever be in a position to raise kids, or I think I would eventually be in a position where I would want 5, 6 kids, but not, I only want to have kids in relationship to my partner. Yeah. Like, that to me is like, you're not considering yourself. So
have children not with a partner as well. And
exactly. Or if you choose active, like I actively chose to be a single mother, like that, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's okay. But everything was always done in relationship to Edward. And then she flipped script. And it was like, all of a sudden Bella wanted to have a kid. And then when she had the kid wasn't as important as Edward. It was kind of like Renesmee was an afterthought. So Meyer just, I don't have good vibes.
Yeah. But the whole point, like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
The whole point of being of womanhood is being a mom, clearly.
Yeah.
At least
like,
from
her opinion.
Yeah.
Did anybody notice, like, I thought this was really interesting, and I don't know if I'm the only person who interpreted it this way, but in Breaking Dawn, there's this whole thing where we find out that Leah, because she became a werewolf, can't have babies. And we find out she now has like a short haircut. And so I'm like, wait, because she's the first woman to do it. So I'm like, could she just not wrap her head around having a girl do a more masculine thing without like losing what she thinks is part of what being a woman means? Like, is that why that happened?
Why she cut her hair?
She cut her hair and she can't have babies.
Yeah,
I think she cut her hair because as a wolf, like she'd have really long hair.
No, but Stephenie Meyer writes it as like she has this masculine looking haircut. That's how she describes it.
Mhm.
Whereas before she was really pretty with this long hair, and all her pretty characters have long hair. It's like a feminine thing.
Yeah. But see, the thing in Native cultures is that it was a big shock to me personally, because in some families, in some more traditional families, which I'm not as traditional, but I do adhere to a lot of the different types of cultural things when it comes to being Native, that the only time you really are like supposed to cut your hair is when someone dies. And I think that if they had explained it that way, it could have been like that, like more, like the more human part of her had died, and that's why she cut her hair. But like,
that's
like
she did it when Harry Clearwater died, like when Harry died. Like if she had done it, like are you saying like if she did it like when Harry died, like then that would have made more sense. Like it would have shown she done research.
Well, it's interesting
or like when she had figured out that she was transforming. It's just weird.
Yeah, it's interesting because they have all of them do it. Like the guys do it too. They cut their hair shorter, which is interesting because then it plays into more Western like ideas of masculinity.
It is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Honestly, I thought it had to do with being a wolf, not wanting to have like super like, long hair, like a wolf.
Yeah, she describes it because you don't want like shaggy coats, but like I mean,
it doesn't make sense because I personally like I love having long hair. A lot of other Native men, like that is the warrior way, is to have long hair. And so like if somebody dies and you cut your hair, that's because like you are just that, like you're in grief and you cut your hair and it's gone, versus like, oh, all of a sudden they're werewolves and they have to care about their hair. That's vanity. That's just plain European vanity. That's not a Native thing. Obviously that was not, no one told her like, hey, you probably shouldn't have them cut their hair, because I know of plenty Native men that have long hair, that plan to have long hair, and like cutting it just sounds abysmal.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing I will say, like, just in general, like I was trying to say about Breaking Dawn, that you guys were all talking about like traumatic birth experiences and stuff. Like, obviously, I can't say anything to that, but believe it, like this did not traumatize me. Like my history teacher in middle school was the one that traumatized me, and he read Twilight. He bragged about that, but like, though I cannot imagine like being like someone's first like experience reading about childbirth, especially if you're a teenager or in middle school. Like
Yeah. I mean, it's over the top in terms of, I mean, it does. It's like you're suddenly reading a horror novel with like blood everywhere, and like that was a choice.
And the part where she like crunches
and, like,
down and like
she wife a C-section,
up into like a pregnant pretzel.
And then the fact that like every time the baby kicks, it's like breaking her ribs. I was like, oh my god, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like how the baby is like, so normally the baby will swear its way out. Like
in some tribes, long hair is sacred, and some tribes view cutting your hair as dishonor. That is a thing too. That long hair is sacred, and that's why it's like part of the warrior way. Is like that is your like armor. That is your way of like showing yourself.
I think it proves Meyer didn't know
Jack.
No research whatsoever. About. She didn't talk to anybody. I feel like she just wrote whatever she wanted to write, which is what makes me so weary of going into this new one and figuring out whether they did any type of sensitivity reading with this new one. And even if this new one comes out to be completely different, but listen, even if this one comes out to be completely different and she writes for the time that we're in, because I feel like time is what allowed her to get away with a lot of stuff that she got away with. She could not take, and I think I said this last live, she could not take what she wrote to a publishing house now and it get published. It would not get published. So for me, even with this new book, if it is different, if she's writing within the context and the frame of mind that we have now in 2020, it's not gonna flow with the rest of the books. I don't think that this new book is going to work with what we've seen in the first. It can't, because you can't have problematic trash like that and continue it in a publishing house, pick it up, but I could be wrong. Whoever the publisher is, they could have picked it up and said, we're just gonna go with it and we're gonna run off of the nostalgia type thing. But so it makes me very curious to see how she's going to frame this narrative of Edward and his perspective, and the fact that it's supposed to be much darker than what although Breaking Dawn had some parts that was kind of like, this is kind of dark. So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm curious to see how she's going to frame.
She claims that Villainization is darker than like anything she's ever written, and that it has like this like Hades and Persephone type, like, which I think was why I paired like the pomegranate that looks like a heart, like a badly photoshopped something is on the cover.
Pomegranate.
Somebody got that out of stock images, okay? Stephenie Meyer can take that and shove it right back up. She got it.
Hachette is the publisher. It's Little Brown. Which is an imprint of Hachette. And I will say that I think anyone would publish anything she writes having to do with Twilight, no matter what time it is, because they know it'll sell, because people will still buy it, no matter how problematic it is. Like people like American Dirt, that was very problematic. That was very controversial, was still on the bestseller list, even though all that information came out like prior to the book being released. And that's just the one example that comes off the top of my head. And that's very different than the kind of controversy that Twilight has. But I also will say that Hachette, as a publisher, has done some things that I found very like
we're all deeply uncomfortable.
Definitely. But like Hachette has done some things that I found very questionable. For example, there was a big walkout at Hachette. Hachette decided that they would publish Woody Allen's memoir, and they also published his estranged son's, his Pulitzer Prize winning son's book about, about the Harvey Weinstein story. And meanwhile, Woody Allen is this guy who sexually abused his daughter. And then they decide that they'll like take it, that the same publishing house that published her brother's book is also going to just out of the blue publish this pedophile's book. And so I also just question, this is not the first thing that's happened with Hachette. So I'm questionable. Like I do sometimes question their judgment.
Mm-hmm. Well, they know this is going to sell regardless.
Exactly.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
No one's read this. I bet 5 people in the whole world have read this book as of now. Like it's one of those titles that's so strictly embargoed that it's going to be limited to Stephenie Meyer. And
it's the modern trash classic. Same with like 50 Shades of Grey. Like those two are just going to be like, oh, you want something trashy? Here you go.
Yeah, but like I bet like they're like, it's like the only, maybe her editor, like literally her editor, maybe the actual publisher, or like probably the only people who have read the book. And obviously that's not enough, because I doubt any of them are anything other than white. So
there was a comment earlier about Jacob and Renesmee. Do we want to talk about imprinting?
You mean the grooming and pedophilia?
The grooming and pedophilia,
because it's grooming, and I felt some type of way about that.
Can we talk about the best tweet?
Jacob happy and like decided to do it in like the most crazy, disgusting, like she thought it would be like in 2008 apparently, that it would just be like, oh well, like Jacob was all sad and like blah blah blah, so now I found a way that he's over Bella, and it's like all like apparently the only reason he was attracted to Bella in the first place was because of her unborn, not yet conceived child. Like what? Like
so your bro got slammed into the friend zone and tried to get out multiple times. It was awful. They're awful.
Did anyone see the tweet about this? Where somebody mentioned like, so he was attracted to Bella because of the egg. Was there like a week in which he was super into Edward? Like there was a whole tweet about this, and he was like feeling Edward because when the egg and the sperm meet. So is he like, why am I suddenly really into Edward? I'm just saying. I mean, I have lots of questions about how that works.
That could be a possibility. I mean, there is a part in Eclipse where, like the whole thing where they like can hear each other, and then there's like different perspectives. So it's like you could be right, but at the same time, I think maybe like part of that could even just be like queer baiting for
Totally.
the audience.
And also her logic as far as how the baby happens does not make any sense. So there's that too.
Okay, I have a theory about this. Ashley had like a whole thread on this on Twitter.
Did I really?
No, I did.
Yeah, about like how they had a baby, how Edward got her pregnant in the first place.
That wasn't me, was it?
That was me.
That was
did
you.
That was me.
Yeah,
I was
but
tweeting about Vampire Seaman.
I don't give them that much time and space on my platform.
Okay, I
I
knew
was on a plane and I was like,
sorry.
this does
For some
not
reason I had
work.
it as Ashley in my head. Oh my gosh.
No, you're fine.
No, but I think my theory is a good one though.
Go ahead, share your theory.
Okay, so this is my theory. My theory is that when they become vampires, right? Like if they're a guy, everything becomes immortal. And so whatever swimmers they have in there at the time continue to survive until they use them up. And Edward is such a prude. He has never used them.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. But
Maybe I should consult
My
the
whole
guide.
thing
Just consult the guidebook and see what she says about vampires.
no, so I read up on this because I was like, I have to understand how this works because this makes no sense. Because Rosalie wanted a baby so damn bad. By the logic of Stephenie Meyer, the venom is what creates the lubricant in their body. It acts like blood. It's also how they do it and get boners still. One of my friends said it was glitter glue.
Glitter glue? I can't.
Anyways, she tells
Everything
me
in me is just crawling up into itself.
No,
It
he's
wants
like
to
100-year-old
If
virgin.
anybody was gonna hold off, it would be Edward.
if that is the logic, right? That makes you still be able to have sperm come out. Why are the women unable to ovulate and get pregnant for a while? Because you have a set amount of
Their
eggs.
bodies couldn't change, and it's like, but your body,
The male's body is.
He's dead too.
Well,
Like,
you
men
know
change
what?
too.
Maybe it's because it depends on your cycle. Because women can only like keep babies, like can only carry a baby if they're at a certain point in their cycle.
True,
So
but I feel
everything-
like the
So if you
venom
died
is
while you
just
were
the holy
ovulating,
grail
you
fix
had
it all. Rosalie should have had a baby with the venom. That's all I'm saying.
Neeks, I cannot.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Rachel. You're welcome.
I literally I was like, I have to solve the mystery. And someone was like, here's the answer. And I was like, I refute this. This is all false.
I want to hear Stephenie Meyer's answer though. I want to see how
I'll
if
send
she
you the
can
link.
answer it.
I will send you the link. There's a whole
but
interview about it.
I agree. In 100 years, you're telling me that
How
this
do
man has
vampires
been chased?
Yeah, no, he's supposed to be have been a virgin. That was his first time too.
Yeah, well, that's
Bullshit.
The thing.
He was getting advice from his brother and from his brothers in Carlisle. There was that scene where they
Bullshit.
were talking
I'm
about how
calling
they
it.
talked to Carlisle and
Look, I'm
Edward
just
asked
saying,
her-
if I had to live for, I'm not being a prude
I
for
would have
80
loved to see
years.
the
You
conversation
kidding me?
between Edward and Emmett about sex. That would have been hilarious.
Well, because even in different vampire shows, sex is right up there with the whole sucking blood, and it's fetishized, and so it's
Yeah.
how there is no way in the world that you could possibly have that not go hand in hand. He wasn't a vegetarian his whole life. He went full meat, full circle the whole. So there's no way that cross contamination wouldn't have happened at some point. It's just.
But he has this whole thing. He's got to have a reason to put a guilt trip on Bella so that she doesn't keep pushing him to sleep with her before they get married. And so that's how they do it. Because he says this whole thing of look, I've broken all the other commandments. I've murdered. I've stolen. The only thing I have left is my purity.
But listen, you know what? If we want to take the religious route, if that's what Stephenie Meyer was going for, then let's call a spade. Because in Christianity, no sin is above the other. So if he's murdered and he's done this and he's done that, losing his V card wasn't going to be any different. So I was like,
just use the
girl,
loophole.
you are running all the way out. Are you seriously trying to push that narrative? Because it's not working. In 100 years, you're telling me this man has done nothing. and there's all these beautiful women and people walking around, and he's never even just had the thought. I've never looked at them like that. You're such a liar. Like, what? It's human nature. It's natural to look.
I think he's only 108, but or 106. But yes, I agree.
Well, he's full of crap.
Like, very much. Yeah,
that whole narrative was full of crap.
He was like talking about like the whole thing about how he preferred brunettes too. Like I think that was an Eclipse. Wasn't that an Eclipse? Like how he would like.
No, but
Anya, like I really did like her, but like, not that way.
Yeah.
And he was just like, why? She's like, oh, I kind of prefer brunettes. And I'm like, so you haven't found one brunette in like over 100 years that's piqued your curiosity and told the most boring of the boring? Like,
but he's also like such a masochist about things. I mean, there's the whole thing somewhere in Eclipse where he like smells her and says, oh, well, you can appreciate the bouquet without tasting the wine. Like,
meaning you see the way that I got that was like, so you could play around a little bit, but you don't have to go all the way.
Again,
Carlisle gave up when he brought Rosalie home, and like Edward said, like I think was that in one of the books, it was a whole thing about how one of the reasons Carlisle saved Rosalie is because she thought he'd make a nice companion or be what Esme, that Rosalie would be what Esme was to him. And like, obviously that didn't work, but like.
And so he was just a pretty emo boy that he just, and it's funny because he lived in the time of like brothels and prohibition. And it's like, how do you know that none of that had gone on? Like, it's just not logical. Like at some point he would have like flung around with somebody. Like he could have made bank off of it.
I don't wait doing those like 100 years. Like I'm like really tempted, but like I also don't want to get up. Like I do want to see what it says he was doing those like 100 years that he wasn't off like tracking down murderers. I guess
playing the piano. I guess.
Yeah,
going to college.
Okay.
These comments have got me going.
I'm sorry. I brought my mess to your channel, Bethany, but okay. I have deep issues.
I think people in the comments are getting a kick out.
I'm dying.
This is out of control.
She's killing me. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this all started though with like this. I will say, regardless of being super entertaining. Oh, somebody said maybe he's asexual. Hey guys, he could be demi-ace.
You're right.
And Bella is the first person. You know, not that Stephenie
I could go with that narrative.
I
could go with that narrative if it wasn't fucking Stephenie Meyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I'm wondering for someone who like, do any of you know more? Like, I know, like, I don't know. I feel awkward bringing this up, but like, there was a whole thing because Stephenie Meyer herself, I believe, is Mormon. Mm-hmm. And does anyone who knows more about that know if there are elements like unique to Mormonism that were incorporated into these books? Because I sure as hell don't know.
I mean, I think a lot of it is subtextual with like all the purity stuff and like the role of women. Well, because especially in Mormonism, like women really exist to get married and have babies. In fact, that's what they spend all of eternity doing if they are good Mormon women. So like, there's that.
Yeah, I think the subtext of her religious beliefs are heavily laid throughout. Unfortunately, I could not find like an ex-Mormon's takedown of the book, like discussing all the parallels. Because I just know what I know from the Mormons I've met in my life and just reading about different belief systems.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think that the like baby end all be all is a reflection of that, and the family unit with the Cullens, for sure.
It also made a lot of sense that he wanted to marry her before doing anything as well.
But still make her rather have her down.
Yeah.
There was a moment
there's a lot of variation,
like
I think.
at the end of Eclipse, he was just like, he kind of just like put his foot down. He's like, stop it. Like, I'm done with you like doing all this stuff just to make everyone happy while you're miserable. And like, he was like, fine, like, I guess we could like do it anyways. Like, even if we don't get married. And then she's like, no, let's just get married anyways. Like, so she's just like so flip-floppy. Like,
yeah. I will say, like, in terms of like because I have known a decent number of Mormons, like I grew up around a lot, but like in terms of practicing Mormons, there's a lot more variation in terms of how conservative they are, but like the official stance of the church is like uber conservative and very like patriarchal. So
I mean, that's what I know, but like I know that that's not all there is to it. So like I just wanted to know like the oh god, apparently I forgot he's from Chicago. That makes me feel upset.
I'm surprised that they didn't get married and like that they got married, you know, in the forest, because there's a lot of Mormons that are like, I have to marry in the temple. Like that is 1000% important. Like some very devout Mormons. So I'm what are you doing, buddy?
I felt like by the end of Eclipse, I sort of felt like if things were going to end anyway, it should have just been her and Jacob and Edward all together, especially after that conversation Jacob and Edward had with each other. I was like, why do we have to throw
a bit of poly?
Oh, here. Do you want a paragraph and hear about Edward's romantic life and his romantic feelings, like prior to Bella? I don't want to hear this.
Oh, okay.
He says, Edward knew that Carlisle and Esme hoped she and Edward would become a couple, but as stunningly beautiful as Rosalie was physically, Edward was not attracted to her somewhat shallow and self-absorbed mind. The feeling was mutual. Edward and Rosalie always treated each other as brother and sister, and were not always on the best of terms. And then they go to and then Denali, though Tanya was interested in Edward, he did not return that interest. It wasn't until the Cullen family returned to Forks in 2003 that anyone captured Edward's attention. There, Edward met a human girl named Bella Swan. Bella was markedly different from every other person he'd ever met in two impossible to overlook ways. First, her blood ran way no other humans had. Second, her mind was the first she'd encountered that was entirely closed to his mind-reading abilities.
It's like the only thing that was interesting about her.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally, he only loves her because he can't read her mind.
How Jasper and Alice are such a good couple because he's like the negative to her positive, and then it could be like for Bella is like the blank to
they're both super
Edward,
emo,
like kaleidoscope. Yeah, they're both brooding emo people, so kind of works out.
And I'm sure if Edward actually interacted with people, he would be somewhat, like, I would find him somewhat interesting, I think, because apparently he has 2 medical degrees and has other graduate degrees in literature, mathematics, law, mechanical engineering, several languages, art history, and international business. So he's learned some stuff that, I wouldn't mind hearing about, but he would never talk to anyone about them because he's so rude.
Edward is dry. Dry.
Wouldn't you just be so bored if you were that smart? That it kind of makes sense why he's just so brooding and emo, because he's like, I have nothing cool to do.
Yeah.
How did he end up with 2 medical
There's
degrees?
nothing left.
Like, the whole thing is like how Carlisle is like the one who's somehow like it's almost a gift that he's not tempted by blood, like that he's able to work as a doctor, but like Edward does not have that same ability, and he somehow had 2 medical degrees. Like, that's questionable to me.
Fair.
She threw logic out the window.
Could have wanted to be a more.
Sorry. Just gonna say, I agree with this. Like, she probably wouldn't have done this, but I felt like, well, especially because they both acknowledge, like, they finally talk to each other, and they're like, "Yeah, you're. I guess you really do love her. I do too. I'm gonna keep fighting for her." I'm like, can't you just like both love her?
Edward was ready to share. At that point, I was like,
yeah,
okay, so one of the 3 y'all just tango.
He's like, just don't let her have this baby. I don't care if she goes and has a baby with you. I don't care if she gets like 100 puppies. He was just like,
yeah, that was the part when Jacob kisses her, and he even says to Edward, like, what if she wanted to kiss me? And he's like, that's fine if she wanted to kiss you. Like, he knows that she is his, so it's just like he doesn't care that
a little bit,
she would have wanted to kiss him.
Because like it's just like for me, like personally, like it's just a like in general, like I'm also just finding like as I get older, like it's just, and due to my own personal experiences, like non-consensual touching of any type is just something that really hits me. And so like I really did not like, and it wasn't just like my whole thing went like when I was a kid that I was all team Edward and Edward this and Edward that, and boo Jacob this and boo Jacob that. Like, it just, as like, if it had been the other way around now, like, I would have been really bothered. Like, even if it was Edward, it really bothered me. Like, that whole scene, and then with where she broke her hand, which I also want to say that Charlie laughed at that, and I was like, you're a cop, and this boy goes and like forcefully kisses your daughter, and she breaks her hand defending herself, and as a cop, your first response is to laugh. What is wrong with you?
Not even as a cop, as her father,
parent,
your first response was to laugh. Yeah. And I had a serious problem with that because she villainized Jacob. And I feel like that, to me, she villainizes every person of color that is on page in these books. She villainizes, or she makes them do something that is evil, or it's bad, or it makes the reader feel some type of way towards them. Like, that whole scene to me with Jacob forcing himself on Bella was very out of character. I would have never seen that coming from what I had seen from Jacob in the previous books. I see that he's like, he longed for Bella. He wanted to be in this relationship with Bella. He had these feelings, but I never would have pinned him as a character to force himself on her. But I feel like Stephenie Meyer did that with an intention. She did that as a way to continuously make her readers turn their feelings against Jacob so she could justify Edward and Bella being together. And this all goes back to the fact, too, that there has been conversations with the directors of the movie who said that Stephenie Meyer didn't want anybody. She didn't have anybody of color planned for her original movies. And I could only speak from the perspective of somebody being Black, that the one Black character that was cast in that movie was Laurent, and Laurent was bad. And she takes, and I mean, of course, I can't speak to the Native perspective, but it seems like anybody that is somebody of color that Stephenie Meyer comes into contact with, they're not good. They're not good people. They have bad morals. They do stuff that you question. It makes you not like them. And it just put a bad taste in my mouth with that scene, not only because of Charlie, but I just did not like how she flipped the script. And then from then on, Jacob becomes an unlikable character. He becomes
the whole thing, like,
he's very aggressive. He's very in Bella's face. He's very like he's very pushy. He's very like, you need to choose me type. And it to go from the individual that we saw previously, who's very like, I have feelings for her, or
with his car. Oh my God.
Yeah, and you're right, Tyler. And Tyler almost hit her with a car. Like, everybody who's of color is bad in these situations. But
and he wasn't even bad. I don't even think Tyler
was. He wasn't Black in the book. He was only Black in the movie.
Yeah,
well, and then there was that part where
he wasn't Black in the book. He was Black in the movie.
No,
they called that coven in Alaska, and then she's like, when Carlisle calls that coven in Alaska and asks them for help, and then all of a sudden you hear Edward saying like, damn Laurent to hell, because Tanya had fallen in love with Laurent. And it was like, no, he's not all bad. Like, obviously they fell in love. Like, just the whole persecution of people of color. And then also, but there's the fetishization of native men, and the way that they're fetishized is like, that is a whole nother issue that I could just not stand, because they're always shirtless, and it's like, no, like, there is modesty within Native communities and Native families where it's like, no, you put a shirt on, you look respectable, you know, because we're held to like such a high standard because of the intergenerational trauma that our ancestors and that our elders suffered from being pulled away, that we're like, okay, you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to look clean, you can't look dirty, otherwise white people are going to look at you funny, you have to talk a certain way, you can't act a certain way, you have to look clean shaven, you have to have a like clean shirt, you have to have clean clothes. And so like to see like have them like constantly shirtless made absolutely no sense, and it was the whole fetishization that just absolutely bothers me.
Yeah.
It's like, I know you're warm, but it's not that deep.
Yeah. And going also back to what you said, Ashley, about the movie, and someone said in the comments about Stephenie Meyer, like, she's been like, her website kind of sucks, but like she's been like updating periodically, like excerpts and stuff like that. And one of them at the top, she decided to address like, you know, what was going on in terms of, I mean, well, it's always been going on, but like the sort of the prominent movement, you know, surrounding, you know, the murder of George Floyd. And she's just like, here's some resources. One of them was to the Obama Foundation, which confused me for a variety of reasons. But the first one is because I used to work with the Obama Foundation and they're apolitical. They're just about advocacy, which does have to do with, you know, I mean, I don't think race should be a political issue. People make it a political issue, but she didn't even like really put links to the correct places.
Because she can't be so bothered.
Exactly. And I was just
she can't be so bothered.
Just didn't even put them to the correct places. And then there's the whole thing with the movie. Like I'm, you know, like as a woman who like works, like who studies about the entertainment industry, who's like working in the entertainment industry, like as a woman, it's kind of just something that's sort of like ingrained in all of us is like, because there are so few films that are like directed and produced by women when compared to men, when a film comes out that is directed by a woman, you go like, did I particularly want to see the Charlie's Angels like remake with Kristen Stewart? No, but I went because it was written by a woman featuring a diverse cast of women. And so then you have Catherine Hardwicke, who's a woman who's trying to diversify this very white book. And Stephenie Meyer throws a fit. Like she wanted to make Alice Japanese or something. I think she said she wanted to make her Japanese and Stephenie Meyer like threw a fit. And she had to like beg her to get them to make Laurent, you know, a person of color. And
make Laurent black. And then Laurent was a villain.
Yeah. I mean, like he becomes a villain. It's like almost like he's not like she doesn't know what she's decided to do with him. Like that's what it felt like in the first book. Is like she didn't know what to do with him, and then like he goes to like Denali and like tries to become a vegetarian, and then like fails, and then like just like comes back and like.
What's crazy about that is none of her characters on the page are black. And like, and I'm just speaking from a black perspective here. Yeah, none of her characters on page are black, like at all. This is just,
you know, one of the people who tries to assault Bella is described as maybe being black. That group of men that try to sexually assault her that Edward takes her from.
Outside of that.
Of course, vampires.
None of her main cast. Nobody is just coming as a black reader. None of her cast is black, and it's very awkward to see a lot of that translated into film, where everyone who is black is problematic.
I do kind of disagree with that. At least in Breaking Dawn Part 2, the Amazonian tribe, like not regarding to what, like how they were portrayed, but like what was her name? Zafira, the one who can like make people like see, like can like project like random images into people. Like again, that was a movie choice. Like she and her sister, companion, or whatever were both black, but I don't remember like how she was. I'm sure she was described as having like an olive tint to her like white skin, like the way that like Azar and Carmen are described. But when again, it's like you're like that's the film, and
that's also an issue too, because I feel like
you sell your work to a film.
You don't want to produce films either where you are tokenizing people of color because you want to fit a certain narrative that will buy into a certain market. And that's my problem, is like, you know what? I rather it just had been a situation like shit. If none of your cast, like if you're describing people as whatever you're describing them as in your books, you don't want them to be black, well shit, in the movie don't make them black either. Like just keep it 100, keep it real, because at that point I feel like you're tokenizing because you're trying to appeal to a demographic that you really don't care about. And Meyer doesn't care about anybody that doesn't look like her. And that's just the way that I personally feel about it, because that's what she's shown in 4 books. I can't see her. I can't see her doing anything different with this new book. And I'd be surprised if she does. But that's just
me. Anyone know like, how described like the Amazonian coven and like the Egyptian coven?
Very hard to believe that like.
Well, I don't know exactly. I think like I don't think they're described as black because but I do think it's interesting that people with somewhat darker skin is you have the Egyptian coven of vampires that shows up in Breaking Dawn. It's funny, you suddenly get, like, I almost wonder if she was getting some flack for having too white of a cast, because all of a sudden at the end you get like the Egyptian coven and the Amazonian coven, and then all of a sudden she decides that the Alaska coven is going to be Latinx because they're speaking Spanish, even though we had no inclination before Breaking Dawn that was the case. So I almost wonder if she was getting some flack and decided to just be like, oh, well, we'll just have like all these covens from around the world and make them more kind of diverse. Although even then, you know, like the Egyptians were some of the more villainous ones, even though they supported the cult.
Benjamin, and also Benjamin was cool in the movie too, like because he was played by Rami Malek, and like I do like, but like Rami Malek before he was Rami Malek, so like that was cool, and like, but yeah, it's hard to break.
Yeah, and Adam and I were talking about that too. We were talking about how is it that there were like even though, like, you know, the natives in this, like the Quileutes, are shown as like, you know, they change into wolves, but at the same time we also talked about the fact that how is it that there weren't also like other Native Americans that were also vampires as well? And so it's like you can't just say that all Native Americans would have been turned into werewolves. That there probably were some Native Americans that were turned into vampires as well. And so
that's interesting.
That's also a hard thing to talk about too, because how far does your villainization of POC go? Is like, do you have native vampires? Do you have like at least I think that like there's no way that Carlisle would have gone through his like 300, 400 years of life without picking up children that were different colors. Like I just don't understand how he would have just had all white kids. I just don't get it.
That
because
part really
he just seems so.
Well, because okay, like you're gonna move every couple years, right? Like, so wouldn't you want to spread out where you're going? Like, you're not just gonna travel in like white centric areas necessarily, I would think. And even if you are, there are. If I don't know where you live. Pretty much if you don't live around people of color also, like of some variety. I mean, there are places, I know that, but to an extent, like if you're moving around that much, wouldn't you be collecting like of this found family you're creating of different people?
Yeah,
especially if some of them were like on the brink of death. So it's like there are a lot of different POC that have been in danger, and like kids that go missing, or the way that the healthcare treats people of color, women of color, things like that. So it's like if you're gonna save Rosalie from like dying in the street, how is it that you've never saved a Native American woman that was missing, or saved a Black woman that was having a bad birthing? Like I just don't get it.
That part sense. Right
Ashley, there. You get it?
Yes, Michelle.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it. It's weird. The Alaskan clan, the fact that they're Latinx and not indigenous. I mean,
it would make more sense.
About, like,
I'm telling y'all, Maya Googled, and she Googled wrong.
Spanish, right? I think they were Spanish, right?
I don't know. They speak Spanish. We don't find out what they are exactly. There's something.
I don't get it.
Like, shouldn't they be indigenous? Like, isn't like a significant portion of the people who live in Alaska indigenous?
Like, I know there's a lot of white people, but there's indigenous people everywhere. So I don't know how you wouldn't have had different even ethnicities and nationalities. Like, because if you're moving around in populated areas, because that seems to like be the thing. Like, I don't understand how you wouldn't have those types of like different ethnicities, like Muslim and Ethiopian, and like different places, different things, different people. So I don't know how it's just like your regular, plain flour.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, right?
That's like, just me. I don't know.
Yeah, no, she said that the Carmen and Neely's are from Spain, and of course they have a slight olive tone to their pale skin.
Oh, listen, if I have to hear the olives,
I'm like, look, like, I'm like, I don't care what you do. Like, I don't care if I become immortal. You're not making me any more white. Like, I'm already happy. You're not making me look any more
But
white.
Isabella, becoming a vampire makes you beautiful. And since you have to be white to be beautiful, you must then have light skin.
You must have alabaster.
I don't want it.
Alabaster.
You must be the enemy of the sun.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's a mess.
Like, the only thing that would be remotely cool is my eyes changing color, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to freak people out with some weird eye color, but
Not the comment.
I mean, obviously, it's a green undertone when you're olive. Didn't you know this, guys? And you have like some red to it too, like the little stuffed pepper in the olive.
Well, so I think this is how they got her to do Laurent as black, as they said there are black olives. And that was how they convinced her.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. No, you did not.
Are you serious?
That's what I heard from somebody.
I hate
Black olives.
What? Okay, you're not joking. You're not
That's
just
so
joking.
disrespectful.
Okay, hold on. You're not just joking. You actually heard that somewhere.
I heard it somewhere. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard it somewhere.
No, that's purple.
disrespectful.
That doesn't work. That's purple.
I can't. And there's a whole.
So,
We
like,
can't even get into the discussion about black and people saying being so black is being purple. Like, we can't even get into that conversation. So the fact that that comment even exists in this world, that because there's black olive, she was okay with Laurent existing, is a problem in itself. I just can't.
Oh.
I'm curious because like I think what she's doing is like she's running like I think she's doing like 2 events, like one of which is like ticketed and one is like open to the general public, and like some of them are like drive-in, like almost like they're gonna do it like a drive-in movie theater is like what I read. So like people and like with the actual like film or whatever. But I also read that they're like she's doing this thing where like if you write like under like 500 word essay, like she'll like draw names or something like that, and
let me in.
They get to pick like your favorite indie bookstore or whatever. Like she'll do a special like video like a like conference like something and like sends like personalized book plates or whatever. And I'm like, I should have filled that out and hope I won, like so I could ask her these questions. Like,
Look, I'm just saying, like, I need to win so I can ask my sperm question. Is it glitter glue? Why can't they ovulate? And you know.
So that was my question. It's like, if you died while you were ovulating, do you have a better chance of having a vampire baby?
That's
Questions
what I
that need.
think.
I don't know. I don't know.
I just want the pregnant vampire
Bella
novella.
is also very selfish. So like I just like in general. So I'm like also just like having trouble believing that she would have done that. And like Ashley was talking about earlier about how like she just like flip-flop from like not caring about having kids, like all of a sudden like wanting kids. And like she's very selfish.
It's called the magic penis.
Now-
It happens in romance
I think it
novels
was
a
just-
lot.
I don't think it's that
Edward
good,
Peen
Izzy. I don't
inside
think his peen
We know
is
it's not that good.
His
We know
peen is
it's
not
Not
that
Edward,
good.
but Robert Pattinson, maybe.
It's like this. Just
Well,
falls
I love
down.
how-
I don't
Okay,
think
I mean,
Robert's peen is that good, to be quite
I
frank.
like this. Let's be real.
No, not that good.
I mean, look, I love this too. Like if we the whole honeymoon thing, like there's so much buildup, right? Like so much buildup,
was
and then
lame.
it's completely closed door. But we get a lot of talking after the fact about how everything went. Like.
I just. Can we talk about
This
that,
book was
please?
so far from the reality.
Can we please talk about
And how
that?
he like broke the bed. How he
And the
broke bed and
unrealistic
tore up the pillow.
expectations
Right,
that set.
well, you know, that's how he didn't bruise her the second time, is he like put his excess energy into breaking the headboard.
Like he
Ain't
placed
no
his hands like on the
There, look, okay, honestly, it was 30 seconds, if that they lasted. 30 seconds, if that. And Bella was like, that's it. at the end. Let's be honest.
That last comment is very true.
Yep. Mhm.
That is very true.
That's so
That
true.
is very true.
Expectations versus reality.
30 seconds.
Expectations
max.
versus reality, because that whole alignment with him breaking the bed, like, first of all,
In the comments. Oh my God.
like, let's be realistic here. Like, if he was a virgin, your first time wasn't going to be that long, and it wasn't
30
going to be that
seconds.
good.
I'm telling you,
Like,
30 seconds.
30
If
seconds,
that.
because if he really was a virgin and that's the narrative that she was going with, and he never did anything, and Bella was his first, 30 seconds to a minute.
It would have been some awkward, fumbling.
Awkward.
Are you okay? Is this okay?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Especially
No,
him,
he
who's,
wouldn't
like,
even
so
ask
worried about
that.
hurting her. Like, I feel like every 5 seconds.
Well, and this is the thing, is I'm wondering, because like she wakes up and literally has bruises on her entire body, and I'm like, what were you doing?
Not correctly.
I think like just pressing
Well,
like
the head was
his hand.
broke, so
'Cause in the
something was
movie,
No,
happening.
but like her
in the
entire
movie,
body
like she
is
has like
covered in bruises.
like
Like,
on her
listen,
arm, like
like,
pressing
having
it
a
here
bruise.
and like from pressing into her skin like with his hands so hard.
No, but listen, to be that chase, for both of them to be, I'm going to keep it 100 and keep it honest. For both of them to be virgins in that chase, meaning nobody's watching porn, nobody's looking anything up. You have
Edward has
to,
never seen
how
porn,
would
I'm
you
telling
know
you
what
that.
positions to flip-flop her body around like that to give her that many
You know what
bruises?
it was?
That means he
I
had
mean,
to be
what if I
slinging
promised
her
you
around
that?
that room.
No, I'm saying I think he was like his hands, like just like pressing, like being.
But like he
No,
didn't
but,
know.
like,
Okay.
Yeah,
all over her
I know what
body,
happened.
though?
around her arms. It wouldn't be all over her entire body.
No, that
That's
means he had to be flipping her and turning her around and doing some crazy positions that even I
This is
haven't
not
even
what you would
tried.
be doing.
There's no way. It's not
I just know what-
realistic.
I know what
I'm thinking about
happened.
the
I
movie
have the
too much. Or
solution.
like they have like where he like puts it up and like shows like her shoulder and like
Mhm.
they're like 3 like align it. Like that's the thing is like you
Oh,
get.
yeah, so
confused.
But like,
in the
what
in
if
the
you read
book,
Kama Sutra? Because Carlisle
I'm not
has
gonna lie, I kinda
lots of
skimmed
books.
the
So
book
how did
time around.
he would have never looked at some literature since he's a doctor?
Listen, ain't no anatomy book gonna teach you how to flip it and switch it. And I'm being honest, okay? Listen, there's no way that he was 108-year-old. That too, no foreplay either. 108-year-old vampire.
Started unbuttoning any clip.
magically amazing because it's all closed door. Like, we don't see any of it. All we know is that after the fact, she's happy, and then she's like getting comfortable wearing lingerie. Like, yeah, that's the extent of what we know.
Which also I would be super mad if I were someone who didn't like lingerie and my like sister-in-law, I guess is what Alice is,
That's
just like
just
went
weird.
in and took out all my comfortable clothes and put in like all this like lace that she knew I hated. Like I would hate. Like I'd be
Yeah, that's also
Weak,
weird.
dry.
I was
That's
just
just
like,
dry
hey,
as
here,
hell.
I stuck to my brother.
maybe I would wear it, but like Bella certainly wouldn't. She only wears sweatpants. Like
Listen, having sex does not make you comfortable in lingerie. I don't care what anybody says. Like,
No,
that's
it's
not.
not.
They're not mutually exclusive. Like, because I have sex doesn't mean that all of a sudden I want to wear lingerie. Like, what? What? Like,
Yeah.
does it mean like, oh, I want to wear lingerie?
Yeah.
Let's have sex with the lights on.
Okay,
Like,
I
no.
will say this though, like I think that there is this thing like in because I mean I grew up in like this more conservative kind of culture, and there is a thing of like when you're about to get married, everybody's like, oh, now you can do all these things, and like it is presented that way as like this is the big thing, and then all of a sudden like everything changes and you can get all this sexy lingerie and be comfortable with, like, I think that is the way it's thought about in that culture. So
I can see why. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
also, again, I'm thinking of the movie where she like goes and like opens her suitcase and is just like picking up all this like scant like lace and being like, what?
I agree
I
with
think-
Neeks though. Neeks makes a good point when she says like, fact, suddenly Bella is a sex kid. No, it's not realistic. It's not realistic
No, it's
because honestly, like keeping it 100, okay, if they're both virgins, their first time is going to be probably very awkward, very clumsy.
Mhm.
It probably is not going to be 100% enjoyable for Bella because at this point, it seems like Bella hasn't even explored her own body. So she doesn't know what she likes or what she wants or what she needs.
Yeah.
So, you know, him just sticking it in and doing a couple of moves is not gonna get her to a point of satisfaction. So I don't understand how having sex one time has automatically turned her into a sex fiend, because in real life,
And there could have been bleeding as well.
exactly.
Mhm.
So you're telling me that
Because like that happens.
Oh, and
she
then
could
the
have been
blood.
bleeding, and
Made
there was
himself
no like, ooh, I need to bite you.
Do you guys think
Can't
Emmett
take this
put him down?
seriously.
Oh my god, this video is so going to be demonetized.
Do you think Emmett sat Edward down and gave him the talk?
On to this, just to, like, it's like, I don't think. I'm realizing.
Everyone would have asked, is it in?
I realize.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
These comments.
Yeah, that Emmett sat Edward down beforehand and gave him the talk like a 5. He's like, all right, here's what's up, dude. Let's get down to
You
it.
would too.
100%. And I love that visual in my mind. And he's like handing him stuff, and Edward's like, I don't need lube. I don't need this. Just tossing shit out.
He's just
He's like, I got this.
Your
What are you talking
first time is, no, not there. Don't put it there. Like, no, don't touch me there. Like,
And then 30 seconds later, they're done.
that's not comfortable.
Right, 30 seconds
Around, like,
later.
It's not. Well, she just did cut to black. Like, she just like goes into the ocean, I guess, and then like the next thing we know, she's waking up with bruises and feathers all around her. Like,
Yep.
I could just see Emmett giving Edward like a sex kit. Like, here you go, bro. Here's like the condoms. Here's the lube. Here's like some sex toys. Here's like all the stuff.
there's also the
Have
arm
fun.
wrestling scene where like if Emmett wins, then like he's gonna like completely like really embarrass her, like with
Snap
all the
his arm.
innuendo.
That's exactly what he's gonna be like. You would be like, I know, you know what I gave Edward before your honeymoon?
Not vanilla wholesome.
Oh my god.
I will. So Jen makes an interesting point here. I will say this though, is at the time she published it, like you were not having sex scenes in YA books.
Oh yeah.
That is
Rarely,
true.
if
That is
ever.
true.
Yeah.
That
So,
is
like,
true.
It's
Wait,
always
was this Forever by
like
Judy
up
Blume
against the
published?
wall kind of stuff.
When was Forever published? Was that after or before? That's like the only other one I could think of from like maybe that era.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest thing that I ever saw was
Let me look that up.
there were a couple of like steamier scenes in a couple of books I read. I'm trying to think who
It was Hush Hush.
Then Sarah J. Maas
I'm
attack.
scared.
then Sarah J. Maas happened.
Forever came out in 1975. That's
What?
Forever by Judy Blume.
Yes, that yes.
That came
That's
out in
what I-
1975.
Yeah.
My
Oh,
mother.
but like the 70s, right, was like a whole different time.
It was.
I mean, like people
Oh,
were okay with
Tamara
that.
Pierce. She wrote a book where it has a sex scene in there.
Yes,
There's like a
that
sex
was
scene
it.
in one of the last books of the Song of the Lioness Quartet, and that was in like the
Oh,
like
Tamara Pierce,
80s ish.
That's right. I mean, I think it was-
Yeah, because I read that. I remember
When I was in
being
middle
mad 'cause I didn't
school,
like that book.
finding even when I was in middle school, which was not that long ago. Like, you were
Making us
still
all feel
finding
old.
stuff that like I read like one book I think during middle school. It was called it's over here, but like, and I really liked it. It was like a time travel trilogy. It's called Tempest, but like even then, like even in like 2011, 2012, 2013, like there weren't YA books like Sarah J. Maas's, or like even like Jen Bennett's, which is like another type of book that I can think of that's at least sex positive. Like there weren't, like, it just like you had the Selection, you had Divergent, you had Marie Lu, like other than that,
Well,
like,
I think things come in waves
Like
because I think
sex
what we
positive
ended
and
up with
serious
is
are
like
like not being talked about in YA.
yeah, because I think what we had is we had like in the late 90s, early 2000s, this whole wave of like purity focused evangelicalism, focus on like, celibacy curriculums. And so I think probably YA publishing might have gone with that trend. Whereas before that, you might have gotten a little bit more of it, is what I'm guessing. Like, I think there was like a whole section of time where that was kind of what was happening.
Yeah, we talk about a little bit just from in the library world that Stephenie Meyer started. They often give credit to Stephenie Meyer in both she who shall not be named credit for the new wave, the golden age of YA, where you see this transition from like
where I tracked the origination of or like the origin of YA literature. And contrary to public opinion, Twilight was not the first YA book.
No. I know for us, like in library school, we don't consider Stephenie Meyer to be the first YA.
Oh, definitely.
The first YA, definitely. We look at that all the way back to The Outsiders as being like that first wave.
That's what my research showed.
Yeah. The Outsiders and that whole age being the first wave.
Transformation was set.
Yes, the transformation in that golden wave.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, it was definitely made a big change in what, and also I guess in what was being published, which is
yeah.
I think it's also like, in general, like I think like before then, like what, because like going back to like this project I did in geography was, you know, for a while, like for a long period of time, there was kind of stuff directed at like children and then adults. Like there just wasn't anything really in between. And even when Twilight was published, you did have your Judy Blume, you had your S.E. Hinton, but you didn't have a lot of variety of books that were specifically directed at 12, 13-year-olds. And then with this Twilight being such a success, whether it was a good book or not, people were like, hey, there's a market here for people to write books directed at this particular age group, and people who aren't even 12 or 13 will still read it. Like all of you here are not 12 or none of us are 12 or 13. And YA is the majority of what I read. I know all of you read YA as well, but like it's interesting to think about.
That is interesting that she just pulled up, Bethany, what JD just said about Namina.
Yeah.
About how she did just tweet today that her book is being recommended as a lower end of YA because there's no sex in it, but there's on the page graphic violence. And I'm so upset that everybody got that. Isabel, I just saw you hold it up.
This one?
But yeah, Namina was just saying that
also, like, it takes inspiration from her experience growing up during a civil war, which is also like really problematic, that people would think that just because there's not sexual, like this is what I was talking about earlier, like when I was a kid, like I thought something had to be inappropriate. In order to be inappropriate, something had to have like sex stuff in it. And obviously I don't think that anymore, but that's what I was like grown up being taught, because my parents had the biggest problem with like sexual content. They were like, you're not going to get any ideas from like violence or like swearing, which I got that from my grandmother. So that was too late.
So I think it's also a geographical thing, because when I was growing up, my mom was really conservative about things that had like witchcraft, or like she always called it like devil books, you know? And so like there was stuff that I couldn't read that she saw as like, oh, that's devil worship books. That's, and I would literally hold up the cover. I'm like, where do you demon horns? Tell me, mother. So it's like there are parents that are more selective of what their children or like teenagers read versus like I was reading nonfiction with like war and like sexual assault and things like that I was reading that she was 1000% fine with. But the second that I read She Who Must Not Be Named's book, that was devil worship. That was like, you can't read that. So like, it's all different. It just depends on where you live, I think.
I wonder if that's a POC thing though, Michelle. Because, you know, a lot of Black families are like that too.
Because, girl, my mom had like the FBI on speed dial if I showed up like 2 minutes late. So.
Black families are like that too. A lot of Black families are very much have been against their kids reading those books because of that affiliation that they think with like witchcraft and the devil, and like even like you said, like the unicorn thing. We're like, oh, there's unicorns.
Yeah,
And that's why we always make jokes about horror, because like POC would see some like demon stuff that's going on. We're like, oh hell no, we're getting out of here. We're surviving. We're not dealing with this. So that's why there's a lot of things in horror.
Yeah.
So I had both things, but it's interesting. So like I know my husband's Black, and he wasn't allowed to read the
Okay.
she should not be names the Harry Potter books, but I wasn't initially, but then my parents like changed their mind, but they were the same. It was like stuff that they thought was like witchcraft or sex. Neither of those were okay. Violence was fine, but no sex.
I think that was really with my mom. I didn't do anything. So my mom stopped policing my reading, I think around when I was 11. But I think that's also when, because I remember it so vividly, like I got Breaking Dawn from the library, like when I was 11, which is the age everyone's like saying, don't read Breaking Dawn until you're 11. So apparently I listened, and I remember getting it from the library and like reading it and then going and buying my own copy. And my mom was interviewing a babysitter, and a babysitter like came in and she saw it sitting on the table. She's like, "Oh, I love those. They're so good." And my mom was like, "I didn't know you'd read the fourth." I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, maybe since you've read those, then you're old enough to read all the other books, like the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants," which like she really loved, like in books that she kind of like locked up, like in a like put it in like a different cabinet, like bookcase that like she's like, wait until you're 12 to read. Then at that time, she was like, "Okay, fine, you can read those now." And then she also kind of just decided that like, because I wouldn't talk to her about like anything, about any issue, she's like, "You can read about them in books instead," which like also maybe not the best idea to like get exposure about that from fiction. But like by the time I was
actually, I had an English teacher that was very like, I had an English teacher. She was in middle school. She was very positive about learning about real world issues. And like, that's what I was super into nonfiction when I was in middle school, like right up into high school when the whole like YA stuff happened. It was like reading about all of these different types of issues, and like she had just pioneered for all of us kids that we need to learn about real life things. And so when I was started to read like about mystical things and things like that, I'm like, I don't know how this plays into my real life, but this is crazy. And it just like took off from there.
See, I think it's interesting because I was not, my mom didn't care as long as I was reading. I guess they were pretty sex positive overall, because like I definitely got good sex ed from my mom and school-ish. But I also was like in the burbs of Chicago. So
same.
They were very like, let's teach you guys about teen pregnancy to avoid teen pregnancy, perhaps. But I think a big thing with that too that people don't always think about is a safe place to explore sex and consent is in a novel. Actually, like if you pick up a good romance book that displays and models consent and like pleasure and how these things should work versus Twilight or something that is more questionable with violence, it blows my mind because I get it. I lived next to a town at one point that burned She Who Shall Not Be Named's books. And I remember that happening and I was like, that's really weird. And it was a super white town. It was like one of the churches, I guess, did it. But yeah, I don't know. It's just strange. I had polar opposite. My mom was like, yeah, read it. Whatevs. Like, this is the thing is I look back on it and
I'm like, Twilight was my first like of any like romance of any type. And like looking back on it now, it's like that's not a good place to start in romance, clearly. But like obviously like 10-year-old me like didn't know any better. But
I mean, you're not going to pick up a bodice ripper most likely at 9 or 10 either.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree with fiction. Like one of my favorite books that I read this year is a lot of people had issues with it, but I like got into like the author was on my panel like at the Social Distance Book Fest, and like I hosted other events with her, is The Best Laid Plans by Cameron Lund. And like the whole point of that book is like that it's not a race. Like you're like for everyone who's feeling behind, it's not a race. Like that's not what this is about. And about like even if you want to wait for marriage, that's great. If you want to sleep with a bunch of people, like that's great too. And like the overall like message is kind of like if you don't want to wait for marriage, like that's fine, but like also consider doing with someone who respects you. And like it just I thought that was like a book that like I wish had existed like for my like for like 12-year-old me, I guess. But like it's good to see that like people are like authors are starting to explore like using those as a central plot point as a topic,
for sure,
and not just showcasing like healthy relationships, which is also important. But because like me, like I was like, my parents did not talk to me about sex. Like I learned all of that stuff in books. And so obviously I'm not the only one who that happened to, and I'm not the only one who's going to be learning about sex through books today and in the future. So it's really important for those to exist. Especially because a lot of kids aren't picking up now.
Yeah, that even speaks to like representation, like racial representation in books, because like Twilight was like one of the first times like I'd seen myself as an Indigenous person in books, and so like reading that and seeing the movie like both positively and in a negative light, seeing myself in cinema, in movies, because before that it had been like, what's his face with all of his movies and like Iron Eyes Cody and seeing like Sicilian people in movies played as Native American people, and then to see like your boy Taylor Lautner or like Mr. Graham Greene, who is another Native American, a native actor, and seeing him in that movie too, because I also like look up to him, and seeing him in that movie, like it's so much different when you're seeing yourself in books with different types of representation, but be it like racial, ethnic, sexual representation. It really means a lot. So to like, I just like that comparison of like when you see yourself in this or that, because I mean, there's always been literature on, Indigenous people, on Black people, but the thing is that there is negative representation and there is positive representation, and it's very rare, like as a person of color, to see yourself in something in a positive light and not in a negative light. So I don't know. How do you feel, Ashley, about that?
I don't, with the Twilight series, for me, that kind of in relation to the Twilight series, it was kind of out the window for me, because the only person that I really saw that looked like me was Laurent. You know what I'm saying? So, and he wasn't really the most positive character.
I mean, more so like in YA in general, not more like Twilight, more like YA in general.
Yeah, just in YA in general. Like, honestly, for me growing up, it kind of became an issue for me just because I took what I could get. And it became one of those scenarios where it was like you said, Michelle, like if I could just see myself, whether it was positive or negative, at least I was seeing myself. And it's kind of like, thinking about myself 10, 15 years ago, like it's kind of heartbreaking to think about YA in that sense that I was just, if I saw myself, I was happy to even see a character that looked remotely like me. Whether they were a good character or a bad character, I was appreciative of the fact that there was a Black person on page. But, you fast forward 10, 15 years and you're like, that shit was just not, it wasn't okay. It wasn't okay. And a lot of, for just speaking as a Black person, a lot of what we see in YA, 10, 15 years ago informs the way a lot of us now are as adults and as readers. And you get used to seeing, you get used to not seeing yourself on page, which is why sometimes you will see Black people who don't necessarily read books with Black characters, because you're used to not seeing that. You're used to not seeing yourself on page, and you're conditioned to reading books without the expectation of seeing yourself on page. So there are some people who question, well, why don't Black people, there are Black people out there who don't read Black books? And it's because a lot of times they still are in that mode of being conditioned to not seeing themselves on page. So they don't know. And it's not that they don't know, but it's natural instinct not to seek yourself on page because you're so used to seeing yourself not on page, So it's an interesting thing, even outside of Twilight, talking about seeing yourself as a person of color in specifically YA books, because of the fact that YA literature has not always been friendly to those of us who are not white. It had, and not even that, like it just straight hasn't been friendly. Only in the past, 2014, did the narrative of we need diverse books come to the forefront. That was 6 years ago.
Yes.
That was, I mean, 6 years ago. We are just now, it hasn't been, as much as I think some people feel like this has been a constant thing and it's been going on for such a long time, it really hasn't. This push to diversify
And it's not
publishing,
enough.
It's not enough. It's not enough at all. It still is not enough, because you still look at the statistics from publishing industries, from what books are published, from what characters look like in books. And people of color are still not, and it's specifically Black and Indigenous voices are like at the bottom. And I would even say Indigenous voices even below Black voices at this point.
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely. Like,
I
it was,
also
I
feel
was
underrepresented
like,
a
last
little
year
bit.
was the first time I'd seen myself in a book that I was like, this is exactly who I am, because the character struggles with like the way that her skin looks, the way that, you know, she talks, things like that, and like the thing that she's called. And so it's like, I was 27 when I'd seen myself, like truly seen myself in a book. So like, it's not enough. It's not enough. I'm 27. I can't imagine what 15-year-old me would have felt seeing myself at that time.
And I think too, it's just super, and I know this is kind of on a tangent, but just it does, I feel like it all does connect, and just understanding why books like Twilight and series like Twilight, you know, because I hear a lot of people talk about the nostalgia without really saying like how problematic this stuff is and how harmful it is. You know, I think that we must continue to acknowledge the importance of publishing industries pushing books that are important for everyone to be able to see themselves. Like in the library, we call this concept specifically for kids, but I think it's applicable to everybody. We call it mirrors and windows, where you should be creating books in the publishing industry where kids are not only just seeing books, you know, outside of themselves, where they're learning about the world around them, but they need to be able to see books where they are present, where they see themselves. Like Michelle said, I shouldn't be 28 years old. And I just, like, for example, I just read The Deep by Robert Solomon, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have never felt so seen in my entire life. At 28, that shouldn't be, you know, that shouldn't be a thing. Like, my child shouldn't have to wait until she's my age to be like, oh, mom, you know, I read this book and for the first time I see myself. Whereas, you know, you have your white counterparts who constantly see themselves in books. And series like Twilight continue to push that narrative. And that's why I think I have such a problem where, you know, I'm going to bring up Brody, how Brody has always talked about the fact that people have tried to shut them down in talking about Twilight because it's like, oh, well, it's for nostalgia. But if that nostalgia continues to push a harmful narrative, there's something wrong about that entire conversation. There's nothing wrong with reading Twilight, but I think it's, you have to call a spade a spade. Twilight did what it did for the YA.
I completely agree. Look, like I'm Black. Like I'm half Black, half white. Sorry. Oh, I was saying, I mean, I'm half Black. I identify as Black, and like I'm someone who has a nostalgia attached to Twilight. But you'll never hear me say that it's not problematic, because it is. Like it has so many issues, and like
it is.
It has so many issues, and like looking back, that like 9-year-old me was reading this, and like there were no characters that looked like me, and it's still, I almost feel like there aren't enough. Like the first book that I thought that I really saw myself in was The Hate U Give, and that was because of how Star like moved between two worlds, like how she lived in one place and then went to school in like this like really wealthy, like really insensitive, like gross place, and like that was me. But like I also still feel like I can't, like I've read Blended by, it's a middle grade book. I can't remember the author. I think
Sharon Draper.
What was that?
Sharon Draper.
Sharon, yes, that one. And like, that was
that's my girl.
I read, like a book about a protagonist who was half Black and half white, who like didn't exist like non-consensually. Like I'm not saying that correctly, but there are so many books where they talk about people who like of mixed race who like, especially in historical fiction, because of, you know, I mean, I don't even want to explain it, but like I feel like there aren't like there aren't enough books about, people of mixed race. There aren't enough books about Indigenous people. Like it's a whole problem, like all around. And it's like almost like we need diverse books is a great movement, but it's almost like it's not enough because it's not like focusing on the specifics within the umbrella, I guess. It's really disheartening that
Exactly, because even like, especially when it comes to Indigenous books, like even for me personally, as a reviewer, to try to get an Indigenous book into my hands, or even to like in Autumn's hands, like we've had such problems with this past month of trying to get just one book with an Indigenous character, with Indigenous author, just trying to get that book in our hands. Just the thought of trying to email a publisher, email somebody, and to be constantly bogged down, to be constantly shut down, not answered back, things like that. That is hard on us. That is difficult for us. So just to get a copy, and then to have like non-native, non-Black reviewers getting like their fair share of things. It's so difficult to actually just get a copy.
Autumn, I have one.
Oh yes, I'm 1000% talking about Quileute. So that was really
yeah, I have one book that I was supposed to read this month that let me see if I can find it real quick. But I have one. The main character is half white and half native. Hold on.
Is it Firekeeper's Daughter?
Huh?
Is it Firekeeper's Daughter?
No.
Okay. So there's another one that's coming out this fall. That's its own voices, called Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley, and so it's her YA debut. It's a thriller about a Native teen who is biracial, and so maybe go check that one out.
This one,
and then like. Yes, I love that book. That's my favorite book. That is literally my favorite book. Like, I push that to everyone.
I just checked it out.
That is the book that made me feel seen for the very first time in my life.
Yeah,
Sorry,
this one, the main character is supposed to be, she's half white, half native.
Okay, cool.
Have any of you read?
Yeah,
like
it's her whole thing, like how she feels in her skin, and like. Just I had such issues with my skin as growing up. Like I would go home and like scrub my skin raw because it just made me feel so shameful, and like just the way people treated me. And so like to read that book and to see myself in that book and to like heal, and I bawled my eyes out. Oh my God. But like that book, I will always push to literally everybody, like read that book. It is so good. And then I was telling people, I was like, so if you're going to read Twilight, if you're going to read Midnight Sun, you should also be like donating to like the Black Hills Fund, Legal Fund, because that was ridiculous how no one gave an F over the weekend until somebody like Cindy said something about it and Neek said something about it. And that was the only time anybody gave an F about it. And then there was also the Quileute tribe. They're trying to get to higher ground. And that is so important because I actually, where my reservation is, in my little community, they had to move their entire town upriver. And then they also had to like rebuild their church after it got, after it burnt down in a electric thing. But like, that is so important. And so it's like, if you're going to go out and read Midnight Sun, which I am, you have to like make that conscious decision to donate to different Indigenous to charities and things like that. Like I just donated to the Black Hills Fund because I was like, I'm doing this tonight. I'm reading this book. So I'm going to make the conscious decision and the conscious choice. Like you have to advocate for yourself. You have to advocate for the people. And it's like, if you're not doing that, then that speaks to a larger volume.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to encourage people, like if you're going to be purchasing Midnight Sun, like someone like me, like what I've decided to do is that however much Midnight Sun is costing me, whether like, I don't know if it's going to be like $20 or $28, like I'm going to double that amount and then donate that money and then donate that money.
Yeah. I was going to equalize that amount. Like,
yeah,
because it just
like the Black Hills Legal Fund really deserve it. Those are my people. Like those are Lakota people. And then, so it's like, I donated there, and then when I buy Midnight Sun, I'm going double hard on the Quileute tribe because it is so important to get their school to higher ground. And it's like, and then I saw people like complaining about like, oh, just let people join things. So it's like, if you want people to enjoy things, maybe you should see if you can help out like their library and get them books and like contribute to funding and things like that.
That narrative to me is a narrative of privilege. Okay. Like I get so tired of hearing that of let people enjoy what they want to enjoy. The thing about it is that like you're enjoying things at the expense of other people. And the reason why that you can enjoy things at the expense of other people is because you're in a place of privilege. And I don't buy that narrative. Like I don't buy that narrative at all. Like I keep saying like, yes, Twilight has a place of nostalgia for all of us, same way that the Harry Potter series does. But it hurts a group of people. And when you can't identify and you can't own up and say, this is hurting people, this series is problematic, it does things that are unacceptable to another group of humans, it makes me question your humanity. It makes me question how you view other people. Because that to me means that you're self-absorbed and you don't care about anybody else around you because it's not affecting you. So a lot of times, and this is me just personally, this is my opinion, I feel like with everything that's been going on with everybody and their allyship and stuff like that, that makes me question a lot of stuff. Whether it's because you are showing allyship for Black people or you're talking about Indigenous people, like if you can't separate yourself from something because it's hurting somebody or it's harming somebody and you want it for enjoyment, that's a problem. I'm not saying that you can't, because once again, as a librarian, I can't condone censorship. I don't condone censorship because it's just not my state of mind. It's not who I am. It's not what my profession is about. Whether I like something or not, I'm not going to stop somebody from reading something. I just can't. It's not within my blood. But you can read something and also say, you know, this is not right. There's something about this that's not, it's not okay. It's harming these specific groups of people, you know. And for me, I'm specifically finding avenues of getting Midnight Sun without putting money in Stephenie Meyer's pocket, because the way, and I have listened to, just looking at Brody's thread, listening to other Native voices and perspectives, I can't put money in her pocket. I can't, because it's harming a group of individuals. And I think that, you know, I can't speak to the Native experience, but as a person in a marginalized group, I know how that situation can end up and how that situation can end up feeling. So I'll find other avenues before I put money in her pocket. That doesn't mean that I won't read it, because, you know, part of me is like, as a librarian, I need to read it out of curiosity. I need to read it, but I'm not going to I'm not going to pay your bills either for writing this book.
That woman already has enough to pay like multiple lifetimes of bills. And then,
I just she needs to update her blog. It looks like from like 2005.
So
I also completely get what you're saying, actually, because like, for example, like I loved like past tense Harry Potter. Like that was just, it was really fun, and like it was just a way to escape. But like I don't get to make the decision to read that book anymore, because to read those books anymore, because I am not transgender. I am not because I am not. And it is, and what that author was saying, I look at it and I think it's disgusting and it's reprehensible, but it's also not directly harming me and my state of being. It is harming other people and their state of being. And if you want to call yourself an ally, if you want to stand with other people, then you can't support people who are degrading other people's state of being. And so, you know, I mean, I've heard some people, like with regards to that particular series, I mean, I've heard people say like, oh, but like, don't let that person like ruin like the whole series for it. And it's like, it's very hard to be past the artist, like the work. And
I mean, I think there are different ways of approaching that in particular that are valid. I do think, especially if you have a platform, to think carefully about what you're promoting to other people. Like, I think it's valid to choose not to read them again. I think it's valid to just not talk about them publicly again. You know, so like, I don't I don't know. Like I think that at least for me, like either of those approaches are fine. I do think there's something to be said for not financially supporting her as an author any further while she's living. And I know people who take that approach where if an author is still alive, they won't financially purchase book, like won't financially contribute to new books from them. So like at least my take on it is it's not something I'll be talking about on my channel any further. Like, will I still privately have what I have and maybe read them at some point? Yeah. Am I going to talk about it? No. So I don't know.
I want to answer Lynn's question. Lynn said, do authors still benefit financially from library books? I don't know how much. I don't know how much they would benefit from it as far as like an upright purchase, because library checkouts and library purchases do still help authors to an extent. Which is why you'll see authors say, like, even if you can't buy the book, check it out from your local library, because what ends up happening, this is kind of a complicated process. Some libraries, if they see that an item is getting a lot of checkouts or it's circulating heavily, what they will do is they will purchase more copies of that book. Now, a lot of libraries are not buying things at full price because they're buying in bulk. So you'll see them, some libraries will lease books. So like for Midnight Sun from my library, I'm sure 9 times out of 10, we'll lease from a company, meaning that we literally are borrowing, we're paying to borrow from them so we can have them in our collection. That way we can let other people borrow them. But digitally, you know, that's a different ball game. Whereas we may buy a license for an extended period of time and we may have to pay to renew that license. How much money authors see from those purchases probably is not as much as you would think from an outright purchase, because things are done in bulk, and then a lot of that money is probably going to the publishing house first before the author sees it. I know that, and I'm only saying that because when I had asked Jason Reynolds about that, about how much money he was seeing from his book purchases, you know, he was saying like a book may cost $17, $18 from him. He was only seeing $1 to $2 of that. So that's an upright purchase. So I don't know how much you're truly benefiting from it, but if you can get it from your library, if you don't feel comfortable outright using your money to purchase an item from an author that you just may not agree with their principles and where they stand, I would definitely try to get it from your library first, or from some, especially secondhand. Secondhand, it's no money. They see none of that money.
Yeah, like the librarians in the library are like the real MVPs. When I like growing up, I had never, like from our public library here in Aberdeen, I had never checked out a book because somebody told me that it costed like $30 a month or something like that. And I'm a poor kid. So I was like, we cannot afford that. That's not happening. And so I did not know that it was like public, like it was free.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I found that out, I like cried, got a library card. And then when I found out that you could request books, my like poor child in me was like crying. So like, the first time I'd ever requested a book and then it showed up and it was all new and nice, I was like, oh my God, you guys are so amazing. Like, I was 26, okay? I'm like bawling in the library, seeing my name in this little receipt, like, oh, this is the book, you can check it out. And I'm like, oh my God. So like to see that is just, yeah, I would definitely recommend getting it from your library if you can. I think mine is closed right now, so I won't. But I do, like the same friend that did get me into the series, I'm going to see if they can like, if we can somehow like borrow it from each other or something. Cause
that's smart. Yeah.
I'm still going to donate. I just don't want to, if I don't have to, then I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, as an
example,
what I ask is like for indies, we get, like at least like sometimes we order directly from the publisher. Sometimes most of the time we order from a company called Ingram, and we get like all of our books generally like at a discount of 40% and above, like not even if it's not in bulk. But like obviously like supporting indies is something that's really important to me. And like I haven't really made the decision yet about what I'm going to do regarding Midnight Sun. Like, I mean, there are so many ways that I could go. Like I'm thinking that maybe for me, like the right way to go might be to, you know, purchase it from a Black owned indie bookstore. Maybe it's just to purchase it from my indie. Like I haven't made the decision yet, but there are ways for everyone, whether it's going to the library, there are ways to, whether it's going to the library, whether it's, purchasing it from, a local business whose vibrancy, whose ability to be there depends on you making a purchase. I mean, there are ways to go about doing it. And like, I really haven't made the decision yet. I mean, I probably will get it from my indie, and I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with it. I haven't made the decision yet, but there are ways to do it. But I would say, yeah, like going to your library is probably the easiest option. It might not always be the most convenient because everyone's going to be like requesting it, but like you've waited 10 years for this book. You can wait a little bit longer, like a couple weeks.
True. Yeah. So I've pre-ordered it from a Black-owned indie bookstore. I probably will also end up listening to it on Audible and then returning it.
That's my plan.
And then when I went, because I didn't own these anymore.
Amazon. I mean, what else?
Yeah. So I got these used from my local indie, at least the last 3 of them for the project, because I needed them to read for this project. Yeah. Rebecca, if you want to type a question in the comments, we can try to answer it. And probably we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes. We've been going almost 2 hours, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably will purchase it from an indie bookstore because that is what's important. A lot of things are important to me, but as an indie bookseller, that's also supporting indie bookstores, particularly Black-owned indie bookstores, is a way that I can make a is a way that I can be supportive beyond just, donating to Black Lives Matter, beyond protesting because I know that in particular, a lot of people don't know this, but literally every sale that indie bookstores make is we basically make 0 profit every year. We depend on every single purchase makes a difference. And so it's also a bit of activism. It's also, even if it's buying a book by the author is buying it from an indie bookstore is ensuring that community, that a local community hub can still thrive. And that's something.
And also making sure that you're donating to those Indigenous places and to Black Lives Matter and different types of legal funds, because it's if you're going to buy it, if you're going to somehow participate in the financial part of it, then you also need to make sure you're doing your due diligence. And that's what's really important.
Yeah.
I agree.
And for those
you can't just read about a Black character or an Indigenous character and then not donate.
Yeah. Yeah, and for anybody who's watching the live stream, in the video description, there is a link to the Higher Ground project for the Quileute people if you want to donate there, where they're trying, because they're on the coast and their global warming is affecting them, and so they're trying to move their school to ground that's safer and not going to get flooded. So that link is in the video description if you guys want to use that.
And I did just tweet today about the Black Hills Legal Fund.
Perfect.
Today.
Awesome. So, like I said, we've been going about 2 hours, which I think is pretty long. So, any final thoughts? We will be back. It's already scheduled. We'll be back talking about Midnight Sun. For those who want to join us, let me pull it up. Somebody have it up right now. You get a while to read it.
You get 2 weeks.
I don't want to know why Midnight Sun
August 14th.
More than twice as long as Twilight. I'd like to know that, but
we're gonna find out.
It's 600 pages. I'm crying.
Yeah, that's
Listen, the audiobook is 24 hours. I don't get that.
So that's
it's probably a really slow narrator, but you can speed it up on Audible, so that's fine.
Oh,
I'll listen on 3 times speed.
That'll be under 12 hours for me if I were listening to it, but I'll be physically reading.
24 hours. I was I don't have 24 hours to dedicate to that, but okay.
So, Rebecca, yes, you can return audiobooks from Audible. Every year you get you get a certain number that you can return without emailing them. But if you run out of ones where they let you do it, you can just email them or call them and you can return stuff. Which I do stuff that I don't want to keep. But yeah, so we'll be back August 14th, same time. It's Friday evening to talk about Midnight Sun, which gives you 10 days to read the book. So,
or just listen to us yell about it.
I'm gonna slam it.
And the venomous.
I'm so curious. Like,
I'm glad
honestly,
you guys have enjoyed
I'm
this.
probably gonna run out of speed. Like, what's funny is like for some books I annotate, like I have a color coded system, and like pink is for like stuff that I like or that resonates with me. There's gonna be 0 of that, and like usually pink is what I run out of like the fastest, and orange is like the color because like orange is like my least favorite color, is like the color I use for stuff I don't like, and like I'm gonna like have to like, so usually I have like sticky tab like packs that have like no pink and like all like orange and like purple and whatnot. I'm gonna have to like dig up my old ones that have like extra orange tabs on them just for this experience.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be bad, guys.
All right,
It's
cool.
gonna be long.
Well, thank you, everybody. This was definitely fun.
Yeah. Especially the middle.
And we'll be back to talk to everybody in a few weeks. So thanks for everybody hanging out tonight.
Yeah.